You can trade news, you can have positions overnight, you can have positions over the weekend, you can have a bigger drawdown than they say. There's complete freedom in that way because actually you're managing your own monies.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I'm sitting down with Juan Colon, the co-founder of Darwinex. It's going to be good to talk about Darwinex, how it differentiates from prop firms, kind of like the model behind it, and how to use this test also from Darwinex. So Juan, welcome on the podcast. How's it going today?
Well, thank you so much. It's a real pleasure and a privilege to be speaking to you and your audience.
Yeah, of course, good to connect. I've heard a lot about you. Of course, we interviewed traders on Darwinex a couple of times before, people who are making some good money with your platform, who are having big funds with it. Good to talk to the guys behind it and kind of see how that's going a little bit. But tell us a bit more about like what you do these days. Are you only with Darwinex, or what consists your job on a day-to-day?
So my job on a day-to-day basis, well, that's a good question. My formal title is the CEO. I like to describe that as a kind of chief evangelizing officer. So that's what I do the most in terms of explaining what we do, speaking to our kind of best clients, because we're part of what we do, as I'll explain later, is trying to grow with them. So I guess you could summarize it as explaining what we're doing right now, and then looking at what we're going to be doing 2 to 3 years from now, and guiding the strategy for everyone else with the company and hopefully the community to follow.
So I want to go back in time and I want to hear how you started Darwinex. So what was the idea behind it and kind of how it went from the start?
Okay, so the idea behind this is I'm a co-founder, and actually I'm sort of number 2 in the story of this. Number 1 is my brother, and he's a trader. He was back in 2006 onwards. He really started trading initially equities, then futures. He gradually also started to trade FX. I guess you could call him like a macro trader in that way. And then he worked on his track record 3-4 years. He started kind of having what he thought was a winning strategy. And at that point, he basically figured, I'm trading like 50 grand, which is what I've managed to put together over the last kind of 10 years of my job. If I make 20% a year, that's a really good year. If I try to make more than that, there's a big risk that I lose my 50K. So 20% of 50K is 10K a year. I can't make a living on that. So I'd like to essentially, build up a revenue base off the back of my trading. And he started sort of posing questions to himself. Of course, he started with like friends and family, including myself. But then he got to a point where, kind of once you've got 10, 15, 20 people, it's just becoming a kind of day job, really, to cater to their needs. People call you, which mortgage should I be taking, stuff that's got nothing to do with the trading and so on. And at that point, he basically said, look, there's got to be better ways than this. Getting regulated in his own right was just not an option for a number of reasons. And he looked out for the different platforms that were at the time, which include the likes of eToro and so on. And he saw things in those that he didn't like as a manager. So he essentially decided to create what is today Darwinex as a solution for people like him, people who love the trading, people who wanted to make a living from the trading, but didn't necessarily want to create a side job in building an asset management thing. And also, and this importantly too, wanted to continue to live in freedom, meaning not working for others. So that's kind of how this came about. We started in 2012, and the company has since been growing to 70 employees who mostly build our own fintech. We are regulated by the FCA in the UK and also by the CNMV in Spain, which gives us permission to operate in all of Europe. What I like the most about what we've done is to see the likes of Martin, who was with you the other day, and others, seeing those guys build something, their own thing on top of what we've built is, I think that's one of the things that makes me proudest looking back at the last 10 years.
Yeah, it's definitely a crazy story, and it's making a lot of possibilities for traders as well, who are able to get some capital, build a fund basically, which will take a lot of like efforts and like support and everything, and like handling all the administrative tasks, but you do all this stuff for them so they can kind of just focus on the trading part, which is of course a really good aspect. So both Atu and Martin are really good guys with your company. They trade a pretty big fund, both of them, and they've been able to benefit a lot from that. So definitely a good thing there for sure.
Yeah, I think that those are like the best things one remembers. It's been obviously it's a tough journey, but those are definitely on the top moments.
Now, Darwinex is a place where you can trade, but you can also kind of get a fund around it. So how does that work out? Is it the same thing for both kind of people? Because some people might just want to trade with you as the broker. Other people might want to start the fund, get some capital. How do these kind of two things go in line?
Okay, so we think of Darwinex as a marketplace or a market, which has two sides to it. Obviously, it's the guys who want to sell strategies and the investors who want to buy strategies. So that's kind of the general pitch to it. You now mentioned the point around people trading with us. So back when we started the project, we didn't really think of being a broker. We thought there were enough like brokers out there. We should just connect to some of them. And then there were a number of things that made us change our mind. So the first one is that if we hadn't been the only source that both traders and investors had to trust, when something went wrong, we would have to kind of turn around to the investors and say, oh, look, the broker from the trader messed up and this resulted in your messing up, or the other way around, right? If on the investor side, things didn't go well, that wouldn't have worked. So we basically figured it's better if there's only one guy with whom the buck stops. The other one was a business decision, quite frankly, in that obviously we had to pay the bills, and a broker has a proven revenue model. We started off with our own asset management license, more on that later in 2013. We got our own broker license in 2014. And the way the model works today is, because it's going to change going forward as well, but traders trade their own capital with our broker, and then investors open an account with our broker as well. And then there's a regulatory solution whereby the traders who trade with our broker generate signals that they sell to our asset manager, and our asset manager then sells investment strategies to the investors at the other end. And the benefit in this is that we, meaning Darwinex, are the only ones who need to maintain a regulatory license to face the investors, which means the traders can essentially trade their own accounts, and we pay them off the back of the fees we collect from investors. So it's really a platform approach. That means that the traders only ever have to contract with us. They don't have to kind of have individual contracts with any of the individual investors. And the same thing for the investors. The investors have a single contract with us, and they can access any of the traders in the marketplace.
A lot of shares are asking, do they need any kind of like regulations or any kind of license to be able to manage capital for Darwinex? Or is it all handled by the contract and how that's done in the background by your company?
Okay, so one certainly needs regulations to do this. So in order to distribute investments and manage investments on behalf of clients, as well as holding client monies, one needs a whole host of regulatory permissions. But the interesting bit here is that we hold those, and we are the ones facing the end investors. From the standpoint of the trader, all he's got is a contract, a brokerage contract with us, just like he would have with any other broker. And then there's a signal purchase agreement whereby the trades that he places with our broker become signals that they sell to our asset manager. And then our asset manager essentially buys the trades from, say, Etienne for a consideration which is proportional to the fees that we're collecting from investors in the Etienne strategy. So the answer is no. Etienne doesn't need a regulatory permission. All he signs is a contract with us whereby he's selling us some stuff.
What about people who are in a province, or I don't know in Canada we have this issue, but or in a province or country where trading is not very much allowed, or there are many rules around it? Like we could think of the United States, probably hard for you to operate in the US for sure. Can these people still get the funding, or because they trade with your broker, they're not allowed to get the funding?
Yeah. So again, our broker doesn't provide funding. What we're doing is buying information, right? So it is as if you have the funding, because there is trading behind it, but you don't get to see any of that. The money stays with us, not with you. All we're doing is buying your trading signals and paying you as a function of what we make. So it is as if you were managing the funds, but you're not managing them, because if you were, you would probably be a part of the regulatory perimeter. That's kind of one point. Now, the other point, and this is one where, as you say, there are jurisdictions where we cannot take on clients with our broker, and that has been a big drain to our growth. So we're looking at alternative business models so that the traders will be generating the signals without having to place their monies with our broker. So the answer is no, we cannot take US clients, but we are giving that a very, very good thought. And I think we will have some news around this in the next months.
And this is kind of like the thing with prop firm too. The prop firms which online these days are able to take clients from any countries as their trader who trade for them, because they don't have the capital themselves. They don't really trade. They are paid as consultant or contractor for the prop firm. So it's a different business model there.
In that way, it is the same actually. So they're not consultants. They're actually just people selling as contractors, selling as de facto data.
The question I get a lot is, what's the difference between Darwinex and a typical prop firm that you see online these days? Is there do you think there's a better option to start or to go forward with? Obviously, Darwinex is good to scale up, but I want to know what's the difference between prop firms and Darwinex overall.
Yeah, it's a good question. So there's start from the back from the investors. There isn't just one investor. There is as many investors as want to buy into the strategy, which basically means the traders are not subject to changes to rules whereby all of a sudden, the strategies become less legible and so on. So the likes of Atu has got 1,000 odd investors. So it's not like, one of them pulling out doesn't mean Atu is left hanging out in the open. So that's the first thing. Then the second firm is I'm aware of, the way many of these prop firms work is you have a certain period where you have to prove yourself. And if you don't prove yourself, then you kind of have to start over, which basically means you're not really accruing any kind of track record that you could use to go elsewhere. So, you bust with one of the prop firms, you're just going to have to start over with another one. So that's the second point. The other one, which I think is also quite important, is that the fact that we don't impose restrictions in terms of the trading style, other than those that are really kind of related to our own technological limitations. So as long as traders place trades for longer than 10 minutes at a time, anything is good. It's really, from our standpoint, it doesn't really matter how you skin a cat as long as you do it well. And also there are no restrictions around if you have this much drawdown, you're out. If you have that much drawdown, you're out. No, ultimately, it's a decision by the investors themselves. It's not our own decision. I guess that's the main differences. The other bit, which again, we're trying to think of a solution to, is where I think these prop firms are better, is that right now we can only take clients in the jurisdictions where we carry the regulatory licenses. And that is obviously a restriction. Again, I think we have plans to change that, but at the minute, somebody from, say, the US is better served by, it's not better served, we cannot serve those guys. So I guess they would go for the prop solution.
Tell me a bit more about the evaluation process. So with prop firms, you have a challenge, you got to pass a challenge. With Darwinex, it's more like more analytics, more based on numbers and actual trading stats. Tell us a bit more how that works out and kind of how do you know if a trader is good for funding or not?
Well, again, remember, this is a different concept. So we're not the ones that are doing any evaluation. We are a marketplace that exposes the strategy. And then the decision to invest or not invest is not with us. It's actually with each of the individual investors. So there's not one evaluation. There are as many evaluations as there are investors. What we offer is transparency so that people understand exactly how each of the guys is trading. And then a level playing field, which probably goes beyond the scope of this thing, but we essentially scale the risk of all strategies so that all strategies are comparable for risk and therefore comparable for return. But beyond that, there's no evaluation process other than the traders have to risk their own funds themselves, which gives them credibility in front of investors. And one of the criteria we disclose to investors is, this guy is managing 500,000 funds of his own prop funds. This other guy is managing $500 of his own funds because, one carries more credibility in my book than the other. But it's a different concept. So this is a marketplace where you build your own franchise. So in a way, it's kind of like Etsy or just a marketplace where you're selling your goods and then the investors can come use it. Another thing we also offer is a regulated platform for the traders to bring on their own investment, meaning they don't have to wait for the prop platform to allocate, but instead they just get their own investors. I guess in a sense, in one place, you're an employee. In this case, you're a freelancer and you've got your means to grow your own franchise.
Interesting. Now, what happens, let's say, if an investor invests in your trading or you're trading Darwinex and then you lose money? Do you have any recourse against you? Can they kind of put you in trouble for losing money in the account, or you're protected for that?
There's no recourse. Okay. In that way, it is same as a prop.
So that makes it appealing for a lot of people to be able to to get capital for the trading. Like, let's say they go with the platform first, but then they want to get more capital. They want to get a wider pool of capital from private investors. That could be a good way to do it as well in the future.
Yeah,
so that's good.
I mean, nothing really stops them, and with all the copying accounts and so on that are out there, nothing stops them from trying on both sides. Obviously, our account is not going to reset. Our account is there forever, so they'll have the track record. But if they are like developing algos, they could connect the same algo to both different places.
And that's good because of the fact that there's less restrictions about what you can trade. Like you have probably more assets you can trade. You've got algos also. Some platforms kind of prevent algo more. I think that makes you a lot more possibilities there for your own trading style.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so we don't have, as I said, the only restrictions are to do with the fact that there's a small delay in replicating the trades by the manager until the investors follow, and that basically means that there can be a bit of a slippage around that, which is the reason that we do not recommend very short-term strategies to work here, which are not really scalable in capacity anyways. But then the rest, you can trade news. You can have positions overnight. You can have positions over the weekend. You can have a bigger drawdown than they say. There's complete freedom in that way because actually you're managing your own monies.
What do you think makes some traders attract a lot more capital than others on Darwinex? Is it based on purely their stats? Is it based on they know a lot of people around them, or is it something else that kind of attract investors to them?
It really is a good question. I mean, I guess it's like a bit like asking what makes some YouTube channels more popular than others, and then sometimes you just watch both of them and you say, like, how can this guy have millions of views and this other guy who said something much better have less views than that? So I don't think it's clearly not a perfect meritocracy or not a. I mean, it certainly isn't driven by performance alone. That's for sure. There's elements like the more investors you have, the more investors you get, because that gives you visibility and sort of implies trust in some ways. Yeah, I mean, that people become more and more experts in terms of understanding. So, for instance, one guy who achieves X% return trading in liquid conditions in sort of majors tends to attract more than guys who trade like the night sessions with scalping in obscure pairs, and precisely because those things are far more vulnerable to kind of changes in the market environment. So I think it's a combination of performance, some sort of popularity in some ways, and but you do see guys who sort of deserve more on account of the curves they've got and they don't get it. This is one of those where you just never know. The other bit is, of course, to what extent one manages to create personal credibility in terms of disclosing investor letters or participating in the Darwinex community to build up, give answers to the people that have questions. Yeah, I guess in many ways, what you get out of it is what you put into it, right?
Interesting. So definitely the more effort, and people can also kind of go out there and advertise themselves with Darwinex, right? They can also like publicize that they're on.
Well, it's not advertised. It's really so every Darwinex user has access rights to the platform, and they can essentially ask questions. So dear Etienne, how do you trade? Or Etienne, what happened on the 5th of January? How come there was this drawdown? Or Etienne, why are you doing so well? And then people who basically take the time to answer and provide coherent explanations, well, they tend up to build trust. And once you've got trust by some guys, then that's kind of much easier to spread. I mean, in many ways, this getting AUM is a bit like getting ketchup out of the bottle. You have to hit it a lot, and then eventually it just sort of pops out.
Interesting. Now, can you go a bit more in depth into the analytics to provide traders in Darwinex? That's something that a lot of brokers don't provide traders. Like you can look at how you perform in terms of numbers and analytics. So can you kind of go into how that works out, these numbers?
I guess the one thing that sets apart the analytics that we offer is the fact that the philosophy behind it. And the philosophy behind it is a bit like sports or any kind of high performance activity. In order for you to run fast, you don't look at how fast you're running. What you look at is how good is the length of your stride, how balanced is it, are you kind of hitting the ground in the right way, and so on. And then the performance follows as a result of that. So ultimately, there's no point looking at performance itself because it could be random. What's important is to look, okay, there was performance. Let's look at if there was a method behind that, and if there is a method behind that performance in the past, well, then the performance is far more likely to carry into the future than some guy who did some random martingale, opened like 4 accounts, and just one of them just got lucky, right? So I think what sets it apart is, one is the transparency in terms of not trying to fool investors, because we kind of pick up the tab if things go wrong, and the other one is the rigor in trying to look at the sources of performance. So rather, I mean, I guess we look at the chicken instead of looking at the egg.
I know a lot of platforms are having issues sometimes with traders who are passing account and giving it to someone else to then trade after. So they are actually selling the funded account to someone else. Is it something that is kind of more secure with Darwinex, where people cannot just take an account, sell it to someone else, that they start to trade with the capital and then they kind of make or lose money with it?
I mean, I guess nothing would stop anyone from sort of giving an account over to someone else. The point is, once you've spent all this time building this track record and trajectory, so let's say, let's just think of Atu right now, right? So he spent the last years building this track record, 7 years, and investor AUM is flowing in like there's no tomorrow, right? So like he's just grown from 5 to 10 million, and he's well on track to growing even further. I just don't know why someone would just go ahead and sell that out, especially if it's not been random. I think this is where the length of the track record comes in, right? Everybody is willing to flip something on which they've worked for a month or 2 months. I don't think anybody who's invested 5 years into a track record is just going to kind of blow their own reputation like that. So in theory they could, but I think the incentive system and the way the system works is not really supportive. I mean, it wouldn't really be rational to that. I would have thought.
It is something you have to be careful about. So if you attract investors to the platform, they have to be able to get kind of what they want for. Now, let's kind of take the other side. So the side of the investor, if they want to build a proper portfolio, do you help them kind of like build the right portfolio for them? Or do they have to kind of pick these traders by themselves to kind of build something that they like and that makes sense to them?
Again, this is something that we really struggle with. I'll just do it with an analogy. So we are the New York Stock Exchange in this case. Like, we're trying to be the New York Stock Exchange for traders. Now, the New York Stock Exchange does not build funds for people to invest in. What they do is they take all the companies and list them, and then the clients from the other end, you can either go directly through a broker, or you can be a fund that picks the stocks on the New York Stock Exchange. But no one would really say, oh, the New York Stock Exchange is picking this stock, but not that stock. I mean, because ultimately the clients of the New York Stock Exchange are the companies that fund it. And in that way, we just take the traders, we do the due diligence on the track record, we show all the stats, and then we put them out there for the investors to make their own decisions. So no, we do not kind of configure portfolios. We have clients who are doing that, and that's precisely what we want, but we can't do that ourselves because we have to stay neutral.
Do you have any advice you'd like to give people who want to get funded with Darwinex? Like, where did they start? How did they proceed with that? How did they start to build a good fund with your company?
Yeah, so I mean, they're not building a fund. We can talk about that at some other time, but that doesn't really change the answer. So I mean, I guess it's as simple. They just have to open a brokerage account with our broker. It's as simple as that. And then by virtue of having that account, which is just like any other broker, they could trade on MT4, MT5, and also on interactive brokers. They can trade CFDs, or they can take futures and stocks and ETFs. But literally, it's just, you have to trade your money as best as you can, which you would be doing anyhow. That's another reason why we became a broker, by the way. I mean, like every trader needs a broker. And once that's there, they start building a track record. We take that track record, we turn it into an index, which starts quoting at 100 and goes up with the performance. And then, it's the investor's job to pick the best guy. That's why it's called Darwinex, is the survival of the fittest strategies.
Definitely have to talk about here. I know people are going to be able to have a good kind of overview of what Darwinex is about, how they can use it for their trading. Also, investors can kind of diversify their trading. Even if they trade, they can diversify their trading more with Darwinex by having different traders that maybe it's different from their styles. They can kind of build on other styles that way. So I think that's a good way to do it also. But what can they find you if they want to learn more about you or kind of start off with Darwinex? When can they go?
Yeah, well, they can go to darwinex.com. And then we've got a homepage, one for traders, which shows the ladder that we offer, which is essentially, as I discussed, trade your own account, get your first seed investor. We have a prop allocation program ourselves. We allocate 10 million a month for 6 months to the managers. So in that way, we are a prop firm as well. Then we raise investor capital and offer the traders the option of creating a white label version of the platform for them to raise by themselves. So that's kind of the trader offering. And then on the investor offering is you open one account, which by the way could be a Darwinex account, gives you the right to be both a trader and an investor simultaneously. And with that investor account, you can basically diagnose, pick, and combine strategies to diversify your portfolio.
So definitely people can check this out. They can go on your site. They can see how they do with this. And it's been good to catch up. Hope we can discuss more in the future how they can also build bigger funds in Darwinex. Of course, that'll be something to discuss for more details for sure. If people have any questions, they can also comment below the video and we'll look at these questions for next time. And I appreciate your time, Juan, for answering the questions here. Kind of talking more about your company, what you do, and it's been good to connect.
It's a real pleasure, Etienne. It's been fantastic. Merci. And thank you everyone who's listened to this till the end.